Your genes are not your destiny, and why living blue, not feeling blue, but living blue is a key to health. You want to know more about this? I'm sure you do. This is fascinating information about something called blue zones that you want to know. So watch this video to find out. Hi, my name is Jesse. Welcome to the channel Open Source Owners, where we talk about what would it be like if humans had an owner's manual. Well, this would definitely be in it, because it is really critical to understand the difference between epigenetics, genetics, and then the blue zones is just sort of the example that we're going to use to really highlight how important understanding the difference between sort of classical genetics and then epigenetic and epigenetic phenomena is. Okay, so epigenetics, I know this is kind of small, but epigenetics are the changeable parts of our genome. Okay, so that's easy enough, they change. If you think about your genetics as being the fixed aspects of your genome, so this is like, you cannot change your eye color. That's part of your genetic destiny, right? You cannot change your bone structure. Certain diseases are or seem to be genetically sort of hardwired, like Down syndrome or sickle cell anemia. But most diseases, and this is something that I don't think everybody knows, are not genetic, but rather are epigenetic or lifestyle sort of influence. And so about 20% of our health and disease is really fixed, but the rest of it, the large percentage, is something that we can actually change and alter for our benefits, which is good news, right? So even if we take this conservative figure, let's say about 20% of the diseases that you have or you might get before you pass away are going to be sort of like fixed, and there's not much we can do about them. But that means that 80% are alterable. We can actually change them. And that is what is referred to as epigenetics. Our genetic expressions are not fixed, how our genes are expressed. So this is what epigenetics means. Epi just means upon the gene. So above or upon the gene or our genome, we are influencing its activation. So about 80% of our health and disease is not fixed, but changes based on our lifestyle choices, right? So one way to think about genetics is like an architectural blueprint for a building. So if you think about like the building you work in or the school that you went to when you were growing up, some big building, right? That has an actual architectural floor plan, etc. And that is sort of fixed, the way that the buildings are laid out, where the cafeteria is, how the plumbing is sort of like set up initially, all that sort of stuff, right? And that's kind of like our genetics. But epigenetics, if you're using a building example, is what happens inside of the building. So like the chairs change over time. We don't have the same chair since it was built, right? Or the wallpaper or the wall coloring or the flooring or the people, indeed, that go in and out of that building and make the building sort of come alive with activity run by people, right? All of those things change. So just to be clear, the genetics are the fixed parts and the epigenetics are the changeable parts. Now, when we start saying we're changing our gene expression, we are really referring to our genetic ability to make certain types of proteins. And the proteins are the things that do the work in the body. And so the proteins go off and do all sorts of other sort of things. They're used to build or tear down. They're used to detox. They're used to build up defenses or build new cells and all that type of thing. So what we're actually changing is what type of proteins the genes are going to be activating or not. But there's also a silencing effect. So sometimes with epigenetics, you can actually silence certain genes or then wake them up, alert them, bring them into expression again if they have been silenced. Okay, so let's move on and talk a little bit more about epigenetics, right? So epigenetics changes when people change how they are living. That's the easiest way to think about it. So change what you eat and your microbiome changes within days, which then affects your genetic expression. It affects your epigenetic. And in fact, if we're getting into epigenetics and you include the microbiome, you're talking now about the inclusion into the human genome, which is about 20,000 genes we each have. Now you add the microbiome, now you add about 2 million additional genes to that mix. And they're all interacting, they're all playing with each other, and they're all turning on or silencing different proteins to be made throughout the whole genetic expression of your body, but also your microbiome. And the changes, again, I'm not just saying this, they actually begin to change within days. Another way, change your life from having no purpose to living your purpose in some way, shape, or form, and your genes will then change through your epigenetic expression. I often talk to my clients about if you have no purpose in life, if you see that there is no meaning, life is just you're born, you suffer, you die, then that attitude, that understanding of life will almost make somebody live in a state of depression. and maybe I shouldn't say make somebody, but it's more likely that you're going to experience depression and feel hopeless if that's the world that you live in. On the other hand, and we know this from near-death experiences and even psychedelic experiences with a lot of people, when purpose gets turned on from someone having no purpose to all of a sudden feeling like there is a purpose to life, that actually begins to change genetic expressions down the road. And then we actually have less disease going forward. Another one, change your levels of meaningful social interaction or social connection, and your genes will then change. And of course, a huge one, change your stress load from high constant stress to low manageable stress, and your genetics change. That's why things like coping skills and breathing techniques and walking and basic self-care practices really are profoundly effective. Now, it might take time before you really notice it, and it's sort of subtle. It's like taking a multivitamin. You don't notice like, wow, I'm so much healthier. I have no anxiety all of a sudden because I'm taking my multivitamin. But you'll notice over time, the body performs better and better and better. And then when you get off the multivitamin, the body will slowly start to perform worse and worse and worse. It's very similar with a lot of self-care. Engaging in social connection, well, you might feel good in that moment, but over time is when you'll really begin to notice changes. And what the problem with this way of working with human health is, if you're doing it right, you're never going to know what you didn't get. You're never going to realize, oh, I didn't get cancer. You're never going to say like, oh, had I not managed my stress for the past 10 years, I probably would have gotten cancer. You can't know that, right? But what we do know is what we eat, caring for our microbiome, having and striving to have purpose, especially if we've lost it, engaging socially in social interactions that are healthful, and managing stress are 4 huge factors that influence our quality of life over time. And that is the power of epigenetics. Okay, so what in the heck are blue zones? So living blue, as I call it, not like being depressed, but living in a blue zone way is probably the best general advice I can give to anybody just about, in general, how to live in a healthy way. What I would say to somebody is try to live like a blue zone person. So, and it's a great example of how epigenetics actually change when we live in this way or when we don't live in this way. So what are they? Blue zones are places in the world that have people living significantly longer and healthier than anywhere else on the world. And there are 5 specific blue zones, and you could read them here. Only one of them is in the United States, Loma Linda, California. And there is not one reason. So as people became to be aware of like, hey, there's places in the world where people don't get sick as much. They don't have chronic disease as much. They don't fall into Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, and they don't have heart disease or cancer or depression. All the sort of things that we all deal with in the modern Western world. Why are these people not sort of immune to them? What's going on? And there was speculation, of course, like, oh, I bet they're all vegetarian, or I bet they don't smoke cigarettes, or they don't drink wine, or something like that. And then you go study the blue zones, and it turns out there's no one single reason. And anytime you're going toward a one single reason solution, you're probably wrong, just in general, right? But essentially, there's a constellation of what we now call lifestyle factors that really make up the blue zone folks. And what they are is eating well. Now, this is not a judgmental thing. It's a physiological thing. If you eat with a low sugar, low processed food, high seasonal, organic, and healthy fats, that generally is going to work for most people's unique microbiome and genetic makeup. If we go with eating well as the strategy, that will embed you in place. And honestly, it will embed you with your genetic connection. So if you were, say, Northern European, and now you find yourself living in the jungles of Costa Rica or something, your genes might need a more Northern European food style, right? And you're having to adapt, and your body's having to sort of struggle to shift things around because you're all of a sudden living in Costa Rica, right? But so what this means is if you live in a place where there's lots of fish, you'll probably eat a lot of fish. If you live in a place that's a high desert, you'll probably eat high desert-based foods that are seasonal, the things that naturally are growing in that area at the natural time. Low sugar, low processed food and healthy fats are almost always going to be good for people. It just depends on then dialing it into your specific needs and your specific ethics as well. So eating well is one of the critical things that they do in the blue zones. Another one that they do is social connection, social interaction. These folks tend to know their neighbors. They tend to all have a shared history together. So when my great-grandfather died, my tribe sort of knew about it, right? We all have stories, and we share those stories. We have a deep tribal, or that Dunbar number, if you remember that from other videos, where, you know, we're connected to 75 to, 150 people. We know their story. They know our story. We're deeply inextricably connected, and we'll eat together and we'll grieve together and we'll celebrate together. Introspection, this does not mean you have to be religious or spiritual necessarily, but there's some type of meditation practice or prayer practice. Often there is a spiritual bond that connects these people. The reason Loma Linda, California is on this list, if I might have this wrong, but I believe it's Seventh-day Adventists that live there, and they have a certain ethical framework. You know, they tend to be vegetarian, they eschew public transport. I think there's a lot more like biking and walking and that type of thing. But it's the spiritual connection, the connection that they have to God and their belief in higher power that really binds them together in that social sort of engagement and makes them stand out, makes a blue zone all of a sudden in the United States of America, where there's no other blue zones. There is one in Loma Linda, California. And it's undergirded by their spiritual belief, their spiritual connection. Now, if you're not spiritual, though, what we need to then have is an introspective based practice, the ability to retain, to go inwardly, to work on our own self and our own growth without expectation of other doing it. And we can do that through prayer, meditation, journaling, that type of practice. Psychedelic practices would also go into that session. Therapy would be part of that as well. These folks tend to move well. So you go there, any of these places that are blue zones, and you look at the nearest 95-year-old, and they probably will be walking some number of miles every day. So there's some level of movement just built into their lifestyles. Getting heart rate up, even the older people move well in these blue zone areas. So if you're living blue, you're not only eating well and engaging socially and having introspection, but you're making sure that you value moving. And notice this doesn't say exercise. This is not like people going to the gym and like, you know, slamming the weights and putting on muscles or whatever. That's fine if that's what you do, but you don't have to take it that far. It's just walking. It's just riding a bike. It's just making sure that you get out and get the fresh air. And then time in nature. So being connected to the seasons is critical. Walking in, swimming in, being with others in nature throughout those seasons is something that they do in the blue zones. And then the last one, having meaning and purpose. Having a higher power, which would connect you to some type of spiritual practice. Developing a group purpose or an individual purpose. Making bad events meaningful and letting those events shape your life. So if you lose a loved one, actually honoring that loss, grieving, but actually making the trajectory of your life change based on that is how people actually gain meaning when maybe things feel meaningless or purposelessness. So I always say, feel free to move to the blue zones if that's how you want to do it. But my advice is actually to make your own home, your own family, your own friends, a little mini blue zone wherever you happen to live. And we just grow all these blue zones across our communities. And then eventually, maybe we'll get a blue zone state or a blue zone county or a blue zone city. But we can't sort of demand it top down. I think we just have to live it and embody it. And this is the best single way I know to affect positively your epigenetics, which is to change these 4 or 5 or 6 different lifestyle factors and really commit to living a blue zone life. Epigenetics is the reason we inherit depression, alcoholism, smoking, cancer, and even trauma. So we now know that epigenetic sort of factors. So remember, we're talking about lifestyle effects on how our genes interact with the world. So those lifestyle effects can travel through multiple generations, usually between 3 to 7, somewhere in that range, and up to even 15. So for instance, if you smoke, your kids, then their kids, and then their kids' kids will be more likely to genetically want to smoke. So that's the 3 generations of epigenetic influences. And if you think about epigenetic and the fact that it can be passed through generations in terms of like trauma or dealing with emotional complexity in an unhealthy or a healthy way, like unhealthily, you might like be more prone to using alcohol or more prone to emotional control patterns. If you think about it in terms of epigenetics, all of a sudden, this is a larger picture then. All of a sudden, it's not just a you problem. You're bad at managing your alcohol or you're bad at managing your traumatic reactions. It's actually deeper than that. It's something that is an echo, a memory that is shared throughout your family's history. And often, I don't know about you, but my family, when I think about my mom and dad, but then also my grandparents and then the great-great-grandparents, they did not know how to necessarily manage trauma or manage physical abuse or things like that. So usually the mechanism by which they handled it is not super healthy, and then that just gets passed down, and it's something that then we later, multiple generations later, are still sort of reckoning with and still dealing with. Now, on the other hand, that also affords you, if you're listening to this, and me, the opportunity to actually change the sort of the linked chain effect from our past generations to our future generations. We're in the present now. We actually get to change the epigenetic phenomena of the future. So you might actually be influencing, your family's generational line, 7 generations down the road or 10 generations down the road. Isn't that cool? It sort of puts you in this place where you're influencing the future in a really profound way by what you work on in your life and how you grow to, operate your genetics differently than maybe you have learned. All right, so that was it. That was a lot. If you'd like to know more information, please download this free 60-page ebook called The Owner's Manual Part 2. It's free. Just click on the link below and it'll come right to your email, and thank you for that. That was Your Genes Are Not Your Destiny, right? And why living blue is a key to health. So blue zone living is one of the keys to health because it encompasses a lifestyle which influences our genetics, which is pretty cool, right? So thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please do a like or a subscribe and add some comments. Have you ever engaged in any of the 6 blue zone sort of techniques, and have they improved your quality of life? Comment below. We want to hear about that. And on that note, thank you guys for taking the time. We will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.